Well, welcome everyone. I'm Jeremy Simon with 3D Universe and also the e-NABLE volunteer community. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our third episode of 3D Universe Untethered. This episode is all about e-NABLE, a global community of volunteers using 3D printing to give the world a helping hand. I'd like to introduce our speakers for today. So if you guys want to go ahead and bring yourselves onto video and unmute. I'll go through the introductions briefly here, and then we're going to have some discussion and talk about the e-NABLE community. I want to invite the audience to use the Q&A panel throughout the day to ask questions. We will work those in either during or towards the end, but please do use that Q&A panel so that we can get you involved and make sure your questions get answered as well. So first up, I'm very pleased to welcome Jen Owen. As many of you already know, Jen is the creative director of 3D Universe. We're very pleased to have her part of our team, but she's also a co-founder of the global e-NABLE community of volunteers who create 3D printed hands and arms for those in need. Jen has helped to grow the e-NABLE movement since supporting the creation of the first 3D printed hand in 2012. She's also the owner, founder, and primary writer of enablingthefuture.org, which many of you are probably familiar with. She's a globally recognized speaker and has been a volunteer and participant in the field of open source 3D printed prosthetic hands for the past 8 years. Along the way, she's sought to highlight and document stories from the e-NABLE community of volunteers and to maintain an information resource for people interested in learning more about the history, design, and fabrication of these devices. So welcome, Jen.
Thank you.
I'm also pleased to have Jon Schull. Jon is also a co-founder of e-NABLE, the global network of volunteers using 3D printers to make radically inexpensive prosthetics for underserved amputees. He's also co-founder of Rochester e-NABLE Limited, a 501c3 that administers the e-NABLE Fund and supports the Rochester e-NABLE Lab at Virtus High School. Jon, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
And we also have Peregrine Hawthorn. Peregrine is a biological psychologist, entrepreneur, inventor, and social innovator with a long-standing interest in collective intelligence and adaptation in distributed systems, evolutionary, psychological, social, technological, and technosocial. Peregrine is an early adopter of e-NABLE devices and a designer and tester of various device designs. Early on in the development of e-NABLE, they earned a reputation as a test pilot and breaker of hands. Peregrine was born missing part of their hand, and together with their father, e-NABLE co-founder Peter Binkley, co-designed the Talon, OD Hand, and Osprey devices, remarkable for their durability and their use of leather in the bracer and palm. Peregrine has been a keynote speaker and panelist in a variety of events since e-NABLE was formed, and now works as a welder and fabricator in Northern Virginia. Welcome, Peregrine.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. As for myself, I'm Jeremy Simon, as I mentioned earlier. Most of you know me as one of the owners of 3D Universe, but I'm also an active member and participant of the e-NABLE community. I've been part of that since early 2014, working mostly behind the scenes. I help to support the enablingthefuture.org website, the e-NABLE hub, and other e-NABLE infrastructure. My company, 3D Universe, is a strong supporter of e-NABLE as well and is responsible for developing the e-NABLE Web Central application, operating e-NABLE's help desk, as well as producing assembly materials kits and specialty 3D printing supplies for making e-NABLE devices. So that's us, and with that, I want to sort of open the discussion with what I think is a natural place to begin. What is e-NABLE? I think a lot of the people who have joined us probably know, but for those that don't, and for those that may be watching the recording, let me ask you to start us off, Jen, and you just tell us a little bit about what this community is.
e-NABLE is just a global community of makers who are volunteering to use their 3D printers to make free 3D printed hands and arms for people who need them. We have grown over the last 8 years to thousands of volunteers in over 100 countries. And we've gone from 3D printing and designing hands to now creating PPE and doing all kinds of other things. So that's my version. I'm sure Jon has a more technical version of what e-NABLE is.
I think that's the cool thing about this community. You've got four, essentially co-founders here, and I'm sure we all have a slightly different definition. But yeah, Jon, what's your take on what we are?
I'd say we are a global distributed network of volunteers. We happen to do 3D printed prosthetics primarily, but I think that the e-NABLE pattern of a global community of volunteers who find the work really rewarding and can address needs that conventional social organizations, businesses, governments, NGOs fail to address is really one of the most important things about e-NABLE and one of the most promising things about e-NABLE, because it's a pattern the world could use more of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Peregrine, how about you? Anything to add?
I mean, personally, it's the place I go to look for new upgrades. But I think that there's definitely something to be said for how agile the distributed volunteer system is, and how it can very quickly switch from making assistive devices for underserved populations to making protective equipment in a pandemic just about overnight. And that's something that I haven't seen anything else capable of doing that.
Yeah, excellent point.
Mostly it's just a bunch of people who get together online and say, hey, I can make stuff. I want to help people.
Yeah.
How do I put these together?
That's right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's a feeling that, hey, we can do this. If we can do this, it's wrong not to. Let's get to work.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've got a lot of people out there with some very cool technology. 3D printing has been our focus, though it's certainly not the only means by which our community makes things happen. But yeah, we've got people that have the means and just want to get it done, and they've come together in a very exciting way. So let's get into a little bit of a history here. Again, because we have four people here who have been with e-NABLE from the very beginning, it would be interesting to hear a little bit about how each of you have gotten involved, how each of you got started with this activity and with this community. So we'll start with you, Jen, again, since I think it all started with you, really. So what was your first involvement?
My family at the time was really into cosplay, and my ex-husband and I wanted to go to a cosplay convention, and he built a giant mechanical hand out of metal. And we went to the event, we came home, he made a little video of it and put it on YouTube and just left it there. And after about 8 or 9 months, we got an email from a carpenter in South Africa who had accidentally chopped off his fingers on his dominant hand, and had been researching mechanical hands and to try to make his own prosthetic, just one single finger to replace those fingers that he lost. And he was in South Africa, we were here, and so they collaborated for a year on just back and forth over the internet. And right as they were getting ready to be kind of wrapping up the single finger design, I had started a blog that had started getting attention, and a mother of a little boy who was born with no fingers reached out and asked if they could make a full set of fingers for him. And we all just went, well, yeah, duh. And so they took the one finger design and kind of basically turned the giant claw hand that we had for our steampunk convention into a tiny little version for this little guy named Liam, who's now, it's been 8 years, he's not little anymore. I keep calling him a little guy, but he's not 5 anymore. So they put They put this metal contraption on his hand, and he was able to pick up a ball with it for the first time in his life. And then they realized that he was going to outgrow that version and needed to look into 3D printing. So they got MakerBot to donate 2 3D printers and worked together from 10,000 miles apart and created the first 3D printed hand for a child. It was originally named RoboHand, and then we all collectively decided that instead of patenting the design, we were going to share it open source to the community, because neither my ex or the carpenter were actual engineers and had very little experience with 3D printing or design whatsoever. So the best way to get it out there and to improve the design was to share it openly, and we wanted as many people to get it as possible. So we shared it out there, and MakerBot did a video and posted that on YouTube. And then there were makers asking, hey, I can make that. I've got a 3D printer. And then Jon Schull showed up and said, well, you say you can and you want to, so do it. So he started a Google Plus group and made a map and told them, if you really want to do this, put your mark on the map and people can find you. And that's how e-NABLE was born.
Excellent. And that's, I think, a good lead in to you, Jon, to tell us a bit about your starting involvement with the community.
Well, I mean, that was the story. I saw the YouTube video that MakerBot made about these guys and what they had done, and heard from the video that they had put the design online, and heard that it was a possible solution for thousands of children born missing fingers and hands. And really on a whim, I put up that map, and I entitled the map e-NABLE, and I called it a global assistive technology network, a global pay it forward network built on an infrastructure of internet communications, 3D printing, and goodwill. And people resonated to that. I'm actually, I really think I nailed an important part of the recipe at that point, and I think it's held up, and that's what we've done. But Peregrine, we know what Jeremy's next question was going to be. It was going to be, and say,
right.
So Peregrine, when and how did you become involved with this?
Now we're still recording, yeah? All right.
Yeah, I started recording again.
Okay. So I also saw the video, but I did not see Jon's comment on the video or the map. I saw it with my dad, who had just gotten the printer and had no idea what to do with it until that moment, obviously. And we just hit the ground running, started making this stuff. We made it. It took me probably like 4 hours maybe to break it. Maybe not even. I think some of the parts broke in the process of assembling.
Right.
And we started tweaking the designs because they were very easy to, they're mesh models. It was very easy for us to just go in there and start pushing them around, and we weren't worried about anyone suing us.
Yes.
So Peregrine, I know your dad had done some jewelry making. Were you guys involved with 3D printing before that?
No, he had gotten the printer recently, but I don't think he quite knew what to do with it. He's now using it for jewelry stuff. But I think it was just going to be a small hobby thing until we learned we could make hands with it.
Right.
But we started, I started using it for odd jobs.
Yeah, I remember
theater work.
The first video we found of you, you had just hacked apart some blackberry bushes with your new 3D printed hand.
Yeah, it was really fun to explore the world of having a hand that I can repair and not have to worry about like it bleeding or anything.
Right.
I did many things that would have sent me to the emergency room if I did it with with a fleshy hand.
Yeah.
And then after I kind of say a couple months of iterative process, like iterative design on this,
Mm-hmm.
we reached out to Jen's family and said, "Hey, look what we did."
Yes.
And that ended up. I think y'all actually ended up giving it the name, the Talon.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
And began a long tradition of avian predator themed names.
Yes.
And then y'all said, hey, there's this whole online community where you can share this stuff and talk about it with other people instead of just bouncing off each other.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Yeah, you and your dad jumped right in and just took off, and it was incredible to watch Peter go from the French teacher, jeweler, leather maker to this 3D printing hand maker. And he just took off. You two together were just incredible.
Yeah, he was doing a little bit of like Blender work before that, but
right.
I've gone to school for engineering and CAD and all that, and he's the one who's been still doing most of the heavy lifting on the design front.
Right.
There's a Blender file that looks like a scrapyard now. It's ridiculous.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's my end of the story.
That's cool.
And then we got in, and I started testing out hands and breaking those hands as well.
I believe you were our first real adult.
Yeah.
Before you, we had all been working with children who couldn't give us honest feedback. Really, they liked their superhero hands. They liked playing with it, but they couldn't give us honest feedback. And you were one of the first people who were like, yeah, this kind of sucks. You guys need to change this around. And you really pushed the community to work harder, not just.
I was trying to move firewood. Yeah. I was trying to move firewood and cut blackberry brambles and move. I worked for a while as a package sorter. And all those things require functional hands that can grip things and don't break when you put too much pressure on the fingers.
Yes.
Yes. And now I'm looking into building a hand out of steel or aluminum. Because I keep melting mine.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, now that you're a welder, do you still wear your hand, or how do you have a tool that you've made?
For most fabrication, I've actually started sewing welding mitts, taking essentially welding gloves and sewing off, cutting off and sewing up the fingers.
Right.
But for TIG welding, you need to have the torch and a filler wire. It's a two-handed process. And I found that the filler wire is about the same diameter as the tendons in the Osprey.
Yeah.
So I can I have an Osprey now, it's an old one, that I ripped out all the fingers except the thumb. Because the other fingers were getting in the way. And I now run filler wire into those tendon lines and use that as a welding hand.
That's great.
That's really awesome.
Oh, we got
Jeremy back.
Jeremy back.
Yay.
Yeah, my internet just decided this was the time for the connection to go down. So sorry about that, folks.
I remember
Well, you missed a really nice story.
We've each told our respective stories.
Okay,
Yes.
well, I'm glad for that. Unfortunately, we'll have a little gap in the recording there, but
Jen got it?
Yeah, it's recording on my end.
Okay, glad
I
to hear
think.
that. We'll see if we can get that that recording from Jen then. All right, so you guys, you were just talking about the kind of the background stories still?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
right.
And we just asked Peregrine about their welding experience, and now I'm wondering if Jon knows about how many volunteers we might have.
You know, your guess, Jeremy's guess, and Peregrine's guess are about as good as mine. And besides, it depends on how you define volunteers. There was a point where the Google Plus community had 10,000 people registered for it. Were they all active volunteers? No way. But hundreds or thousands. And about a year ago, we created our successor online community to Google Plus called the e-NABLE Hub, hub.e-nable.org. And it's now up to, I think, 1,200 people who've signed up.
Over 1,300, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
Over 1,300. There are chapters there are 100-some chapters in 50-some countries. And all of those chapters, most of those chapters, have at least a few people. And some of them have got scores or hundreds of people.
Yeah.
So from all of that, I would safely guess maybe there are 1,000 to 2,000 active people in e-NABLE at any moment, plus or minus 50%. And it's an evolving story.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of hard to keep track of and hard to guess, but we have over 4,400 registered users in e-NABLE Web Central. And like Jon said, about 1,300 active in the hub right now.
Right.
We have over 150 active chapters. So yeah, certainly, I actually had this discussion with someone today, and I said, well, we definitely have thousands of volunteers, but of those, probably several hundred remain really active at any given time, and others kind of come and go.
Yeah, we had probably about 2,000 schools involved over the last few years, between classrooms, universities, and robotics teams, and those student numbers come and go over the years. There's just really no way to actually keep track of how many people are involved. All we know is that there are really awesome people out there doing this work and donating their time and their talents and their resources to do it. And the more people we have participating, the better.
Absolutely. No, I might have missed a little bit of this when I had my connection go down, but I was interested in hearing from Peregrine about, you've worn several of these devices, and as far as I'm aware, still do. Do you still use the designs that you helped to develop with your father? Have you switched to something new? And I'm especially curious, given that you're now a professional welder, do you use something more robust, or what are you wearing these days?
Yeah, I touched on that a little bit. Right now I have two hands that I use. One of them is the thing I've been calling the hyper customized Osprey. That's the white. I wish I had it with me right now. It's out in the car. It's a white plastic with black claws, black leather, an extra large bracer, and that's kind of my everyday hand. Oh, I think Avery might be going out to go and get it so I can show it off.
Nice.
But then I've also got an old Osprey that I have ripped almost all the fingers out of. It now has only a thumb. And I use that exclusively for TIG welding. Because the filler wire that used for TIG is about the same diameter as the tendon wire that I use to run the fingers. So I can just use those old channels to hold filler wire as necessary.
So
That's
cool.
a very cool idea.
And I would like to build a new hand out of steel or aluminum, but that's most of the hands that we have, like most of the designs we have right now, would be very difficult to fabricate out of steel, and also would be very heavy. That much material. We're designing for plastic. We're designing for material that is very light and not very strong. So you end up with these very large, bulky pieces. When you go to metal, you have to really consider that weight, and you get a lot more strength per weight with that. So the designs aren't going to carry over very well, but I'm looking into it.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting how differently you need to think about design when you're looking at 3D printing versus more traditional fabrication.
Yeah, early on in the e-NABLE world, I did see a lot of, at least to me, it felt like there was a lot of professional or semi-professional engineers even who were having a bit of trouble with the limitations of 3D printing, dealing with things like the fact that it has a grain to it. And if you print it this way, it's going to be very strong, and if you print it this way, it's going to be very weak. We had a lot of sort of half-pipe bracers that people love to print in such a way that they would break coming off the print bed or in transit. And I, in fact, have a hand somewhere that the bracer just shredded itself because of the direction it was printed and the size of the curve they tried to get on it.
And we've seen that change too with materials. You know, now originally everyone was printing in PLA, and now we've got PETG and other much materials.
The newer materials let you play a little bit more fast and loose with the 3D printing limitations.
And yet they will still break.
Sure.
You know, one of the
I'm talented. I'll find a way.
One of the points I like to make is that these things, their main claim is that they are substantially better than nothing. And there are a lot of people who have nothing because prosthetics, especially upper limb prosthetics, are hard to come by and can be very expensive. And kids in particular will outgrow them. But being substantially better than nothing is actually a pretty good guarantee that they're often going to fail. And therefore, there are lots of opportunities for improvement. So, you know, Peregrine and his dad made some important improvements. I've done a few things in my day that I thought were just ridiculous hacks that I was embarrassed about showing. And they were ridiculous hacks and they were embarrassing, but they actually spawned some good design. And I think that's one of the interesting things about a group like e-NABLE is that we're willing and able to do things that respectable engineers would not be willing to do, and therefore we managed to make some contributions that would otherwise not get made.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite parts about e-NABLE, especially in the very beginning, was that people were so intrigued by it that we had people who weren't engineers and they were just general makers coming to the community. And one of our first designs after the RoboHand and had been chopped up and, you know, moved around and reformatted, was when we were all trying to figure out how to get the tensioning right. And we had, the engineer was like overthinking it, and the general maker was trying to figure it out, and then the guitar playing dude, who had, I don't think he had any experience with making or 3D printing, he was like, why don't you just like do that thing with like guitar pegs and then it will tighten it? And we're all like, why didn't we think of that? But it was really, that's probably my favorite thing about e-NABLE is we have all these people from different walks of life and different careers and different cultures and religions, and we're all working together for the same goal. And when you go to an e-NABLE community page, you don't see borders and war zones and religions and all the boundaries that keep us from being nice to each other. And they all, for the last 8-9 years, have been collaborating together, and just throwing out those ideas, saying we're a big group of jewelers and musicians and engineers and artists and students. And I mean, even at one point in the very beginning, we even had a mountain climbing unicyclist who was throwing in ideas from his experiences on the trail. And it was just been a really cool journey.
Absolutely.
And those diverse contributions are welcomed, which is not true in most professional communities and guilds. Right.
And I love that the kids now who have gotten them have started giving feedback. And they, when we first started, it was, hey, let's make this cool hand. And then after about a year, the kids were like, dude, I just kind of want to hold a pop can, or I want to jump rope, or I want to ride my bike. And I don't want to wear this thing all day. I want something that attaches to my bike that I can stick my hand in. And then the e-NABLE community went, oh, yeah, us adults are trying to overthink again. So it's been really cool to get all the different perspectives of everyone.
Yeah. Well, so, we've been around about 8 years now, and I think you guys have touched on some of this, but let's talk a little bit about how things have changed in that time from when this first got started with people just, wanting to 3D print a hand for somebody. How have we seen this community evolve and change over the years? I'll just open that up to any one of you that wants to talk to that.
Who wants
well,
to
I think there are a couple of big developments. We certainly went through several organizational thresholds. We went from being what we called we like to use the Margaret Mead phrase, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. That's the only size group that ever has. But after a while, we weren't a small group of people anymore. We were a large and rapidly growing group. Then we did the obvious thing, and we saw there was a need for organization. We created an organization, a 501c3 nonprofit. We got some professional management. We got a $500,000 grant. It was obvious, but it wasn't the right thing to do. And we went through a very tough time in 2016 when it became clear that the community of enthusiastic amateurs and the collection of professional organizational people were just didn't make sense for each other. In fact, the foundation is no more, and the community has continued to grow and thrive. And we have evolved, second point, I think, from a bunch of individuals to a bunch of chapters and a bunch of individuals. But I think increasingly chapters are the fundamental unit of the global community. And in some ways, I think that is true and a really good thing, because humans know how to deal with humans in small groups. We don't know how to deal with humans in large online communities, as I will say the current election cycle and the past election cycle may have demonstrated really clearly. So that's another big change. The other thing is we have developed a non-trivial infrastructure. Once upon a time, e-NABLE was sort of defined by this map that I created on a whim, where people were supposed to put down pins. Then we were defined, and I think for a while we really thought we were essentially a Google Plus community. Of course, eventually Google Plus pulled the plug on itself, and so that's not what we were. But in the interim, we have developed an infrastructure which includes e-NABLE Web Central that Jeremy and his company have put together, which is a very substantial piece of work. We have the e-NABLE Hub. Enabling the Future continues to be probably the most widely read organ of the community. I like to say that Enabling the Future is to enable as USA Today is to the USA. It's an independent voice of the community. We have a funding mechanism called the e-NABLE Fund, which has gotten some donations. And to the throngs who are watching this podcast, we're always looking for more donations because we have a community mechanism for making it possible for anyone in e-NABLE to propose a project and for anyone in e-NABLE to discuss it, vote it up or down. And if it's funded, then the nonprofit that I maintain, whose main function is really just to do what the voting system says to do, dispenses the fund. Put all these things together, and we actually have something of a organization, even though there's very little assigned authority, except for the particular piece of the puzzle one or the other of us takes responsibility for.
I think it's also important to talk about that a lot of this that we're talking about is in the USA. We have a huge group over in France who started, basically it started out as e-NABLE France, but I'm pretty sure they are e-NABLE Europe and probably beyond by now. They've got a lot of volunteers in a lot of countries over there. We've got, e-NABLE Brazil and all these other chapters who have their own. A lot of them have started their own 501c3s, so they are all getting funding. We have just this huge, I don't know, like busy hives all over the place. And, we've got chapters who are really struggling. They need materials, they need machines, they need support. And we try to help as many people as possible. But what's really cool is you can go on the e-NABLE Hub and you can see, a chapter in Africa needs a device for somebody, and somebody from Europe is going to be traveling there or are on a mission trip, and they're going to bring spools with them to avoid having to pay the duty fees and the shipping and all of that stuff. So we've got a lot of chapters who we're all supportive of each other. And it's really amazing to see how far these people will go to help other people and their chapters survive and grow and be able to serve.
Yeah, that's been one of the really exciting things to see with these chapters that have developed is that, a chapter is able to organize and sort of develop their own infrastructure and processes and methods that are suited to their particular region. For example, you mentioned the chapter in Brazil, which is a very large and active chapter. They have legislation there that requires them to have medical professionals involved in the process of evaluating someone and actually prescribing a device before it gets made by their volunteers. And so they've actually put together standards and training and procedures and evaluation criteria and all kinds of wonderful materials which then can be borrowed by other chapters in other regions. And, we have chapters in the UK and other parts of Europe that have had to learn to deal with some of the EU regulations around medical devices, and those standards have then been shared, and the agreements that they use, et cetera. So it's really wonderful to see chapters evolve and address some of these specific needs in their area, and then share those methods and lessons learned with others. And it's this thing that's just grown and sort of self-organized and evolved on its own. It's been very exciting to watch.
Yeah, there's a couple chapters in Colombia, Paraguay, other chapters around the world who have also integrated. They've come up with, they have physical therapists on their team, where they have the recipients come in and they learn exercises, stacking blocks, holding this or that, and building up the muscles in their arms. And they stay with their recipient the whole journey. Whereas in the US, it's more of a, here's your hand. We're kind of tied by the FDA and all these regulations and stuff to not be involved. So we here in the US try to make sure that our makers and the recipients are working with their own family physicians or their physical therapists when they get a device, so that they are getting medical attention. Right. In a way that we can't do like they can in other countries.
And that actually kind of leads into something that came in through the Q&A panel. Someone was asking about concerns around legal liability, the possibility of somebody being sued, and asks if we've ever had any kind of legal trouble like that in the e-NABLE community. I think it's somewhat surprising. As far as I'm aware, we never had. Unless there's something I'm not aware of, I've never heard of a lawsuit or anything like that, knock on wood. That's not to say that it couldn't happen, but I think, well, first of all, it's going to vary from one place to another, right? Each region has their own sort of laws and regulations and expectations for this sort of thing, and we are seeing that evolve as we go. I think our volunteers have been very smart, very responsible in sort of responding to those mandates in their own area. Like I mentioned, the folks down in Brazil, there was some legislation that required them to take certain steps, and they evolved to deal with that. And they've got a much better process now as a result of that, one that we're recommending others consider as well. As Jen said, we always recommend that people work with medical professionals whenever possible. And we've also worked closely in our region in the US. We've worked closely with the folks at the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the ones that oversee things like medical devices, and they've been very supportive. They come and talk every year at our conferences, and essentially have said, hey, we like what you guys are doing. As long as you're sticking to external devices, you're not embedding things in people's bodies, and you're sticking to primarily upper limb devices.
You're not selling them.
And you're not selling them. That's right. That's been an important part of this too. They've said, we're all for it. We're not going to get in your way. That's not to say that couldn't change. And there have been some portions of the medical community and professional prosthetists that have expressed concerns. Some have been very welcoming of our work and have gotten involved with us. Others have not been so supportive. But as far as I'm aware, there have not been any legal troubles so far anywhere in the world as a result of our work. And I think, again, as Jon points out, the fact that this is being fueled by goodwill, these are not things that are being sold. These are just people trying to help people that can't get help otherwise. It's kind of hard to prosecute somebody over that,
Yeah.
Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about schools, because this has been an interesting part of watching the evolution of this community. We've seen a lot of schools around the world who have brought e-NABLE into the classroom, who have realized that, I've got all these students, and a lot of schools are now introducing students to 3D printing. And I think what often happens is a school gets a 3D printer, and now they've got this great technology there, and now the teachers are kind of scratching their heads saying, all right, what do I do with this thing? and they come across e-NABLE and they realize, wait, I could have our students learn to not only make a hand, but to make it for somebody and actually be a part of something that's going to change somebody's life. And we've seen, I don't know how many schools. Do any of you have a guess of how many schools have gotten involved with e-NABLE now? I know it's hundreds at least.
Well, Jen estimates 2,000.
Yeah, it's about 2,000 if you include robotics teams.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So, I think schools have certainly recognized the value of the program. We've actually had partners, we here at 3D Universe have a partner organization called BitSpace. They're basically a makerspace organization, and they've developed online curriculum specifically around the work that we do in e-NABLE. And it basically, covers everything from sort of the aspect of just sort of, sort of intent-based education and learning, and sort of incorporating meaning into the curriculum and creative thinking, and and then going beyond these more abstract concepts and getting into the actual mechanisms of making these devices and how to take your students through that process. So some really great materials have evolved. We've had other volunteer groups that have created educational curriculum materials and have shared those online, and so we see those continue to evolve. So that's been kind of an exciting part of this, is seeing how the schools have incorporated this into their learning processes, and how the students respond to that and how excited they get. And Jen, you've made some comments about how you've seen that impact students in the past and their relationship to some of the engineering subjects, right?
Right. Yeah, it's been really cool to watch the younger kids who, maybe they've been struggling with math, and they don't, they're one of those kids who cries when you put a math problem in front of them because they don't understand why they need math if they're going to be an artist someday. Or the kids who just really aren't into science or technology, and they will get a teacher who brings e-NABLE into the classroom and shows them that you can use math, you can use science and this technology to make this cool thing that helps other people. And then you've got this, fourth grader who's been crying every day after math, who's now showing up before school wanting to work on a design for a hand for a student that they found in their school who needed a hand. And now they went from hating math to now they want to be a bioengineer, or they want to, learn how to use 3D printers, and just have taken off. And I think some of our recipients have discovered talents that they didn't know they had by getting a 3D printed hand and then learning how it was made, and then starting to give feedback and help with the designs themselves. They have realized that they actually have a knack for STEM learning. And I believe
for STEM learning, and potentially for other things. So we have, an awful large number of e-NABLE kids, when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, because this is the one adult activity they've had an opportunity to participate in, they say, I want to be a prosthetist. But as a matter of fact, I've had more than a few prosthetics graduate students say that actually they became prosthetists because of e-NABLE. Those young kids grow up. Now, some of them become prosthetists, some of them become other things, but I think that it's not just that it's a great experience for young kids to get involved, which it is, but that it really sets them on a intellectual and a moral or spiritual trajectory, which I think has served a number of them well. It's an important an important object lesson in what can be done if you just don't get in the way.
Right.
That's an important point, not getting in the way, because there's something really unique about what has happened here with e-NABLE. There's nobody making this happen. There's nobody, in control. There's nobody in charge. This whole thing has just kind of grown by itself, and in ways that I think at times were unexpected. And I think those of us here and others not on this panel who have been equally active in supporting the community would see ourselves as sort of caretakers. We try to support and we try to encourage that growth, but at the same time, try not to get in the way, and just let it do its thing, which has been really an amazing thing to be part of, and just see how this thing has evolved on its own without, it's not like a company where you have, owners and managers and a board of directors that's saying, this is our goal, this is what we're going to do this year, and this is how we're going to do it. It's just kind of unfolding thanks to these collaborative efforts of people all over the world, and we're just kind of going along for the ride.
I'm curious, Peregrine, how old were you when we started this? You were a teenager still, right?
I was 18 or 19.
Yeah.
Around. I had just gotten out of high school and had no idea what to do with myself.
Right.
And
being part of e-NABLE inspire you to go into any kind of STEM?
Oh yeah. I actually moved out to Rochester with the intent of going to RIT for their e-NABLE 3D printed prosthetics program. Life happened along the way. I got an associate's in engineering at the nearby community college, and then discovered that I actually like being a lot closer to the making than the designing of things. And then went through that same school's welding program. But yeah, that was what set me on the path to where I am now.
Peregrine also became a distinguished public speaker. I got to tell you, there was early on. It may have been the first time I met Peregrine. We were guests at a corporate event for the entire Intel Corporation, and we both got on stage for a couple of minutes. Peregrine described himself, gave a nice little presentation, and the son of a gun got a standing ovation, which I have yet to happen for me. But he's gone on to be a really good spokesman for e-NABLE, and I think it's so probably done a fair amount. Pardon me?
I was so awkward on that stage.
Yeah, but that was then.
Great, sweetie.
So, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of my involvement has been, kind of more behind the scenes. I support a lot of the infrastructure and kind of help with things that, a lot of people don't see that happen behind the scenes. So one of the things I'd like to talk a little bit about is governance, because this has been an interesting challenge for the e-NABLE community. How do you handle governance and oversight in a community which, like I said, nobody's in charge? And Jon, I know this has been an area that you've focused a lot on too, and that you've put a lot of thought into. What are your thoughts on that in terms of, how we handle that, what has or hasn't worked, and how we deal with that side of things with e-NABLE?
Well, there's a poster that circulates. I came across it on Facebook the other day when I was preparing a talk on exactly this topic. It's the one where you've got two examples of a leader. One guy is up on a throne and he's directing the spear characters and the rowers in the ship to do the rowing. The other example of a leader is the guy who's actually on the ground. He's pulling the ship that's got everyone else in it. He's leading by doing. I think your description of stewardship or caretaking is an important part of what we do. There are a number of terms for this kind of thing these days. People talk about duocracies, right? It's not exactly a system of voting, but the leaders are the people who step up and actually do what needs to be done, and they are leaders by virtue of that, and they still can't tell anyone what to do.
Sure.
but they can get a great deal of satisfaction from it, and they may have some influence. So we've actually, I think, cultivated a model in which those who are willing get together periodically. We meet once a week in our strategic planning committee, so-called, that that Jeremy chairs. A few other people show up each week, and we just talk about what's going on and what needs to happen. And if something needs to happen, someone comes up and says so, and we try to figure out how it can be made to happen. And it does happen if someone says, I will take responsibility for that.
Right.
And take responsibility doesn't even mean have authority for. So I think that's been an important part of it. And I think it's partly because we learned so bitterly in 2016 that a global network of volunteers shows up precisely because they get to do their own thing, they get to be autonomous, they have the meaning and purpose that comes with doing something personally meaningful because you want to, not because someone has told you to do it.
That's right.
And so we have sort of found ways of celebrating and making that kind of thing easier without the ability to hire, fire, command. All we can do is inspire and facilitate, and it turns out you can do a fair amount that way.
Yeah, it's a nice way of putting it, just inspire and facilitate. That's what we try to do. Let's see. I guess we might have touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but for anybody watching that might want to get more involved than they are currently, they might want to be part of this community. How do they get involved, and where do they go to learn more about e-NABLE? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, listen, the first place they're going to want to go is to Jen's website, Enabling the Future, loaded with pictures and stories and information about the community. If they want to actually begin interacting with enablers, they should go to hub.enable.org. Introduce yourself. There's information about Enable smeared all over the planet, and it's readily available, and it's a mess. But we're a community that loves answering questions. And we expect people to say, I can't quite figure this out. If you say, I can't figure it out, you'll get some answers. You'll get some people to talk to. You'll get some guidance.
Yeah, we have some Facebook groups too. We've got an R&D group, a community bulletin board. We have an education-based group, and all of those are findable through the main e-NABLE Facebook page under the different groups that we have. So, but I think the hub has become the spot where you can get answers more quickly, and it's more organized, so you can look and see if somebody's already asked this question versus scrolling and then posting, and then somebody says, hey, we answered that like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right, that's right, or 8 years ago.
Yeah.
There are many ways in. None of them are mandatory. You just gotta, and none of them are difficult, actually.
Right.
If you try, you'll find your way in. For example, I doubt that anyone on this panel would be other than pleased to get an email from someone who said, what do I do next?
Yeah.
We'll say the same thing we've just said now, but you should feel free.
Yeah, and we do. I mentioned earlier that we do run a help desk for e-NABLE. So there's a support email, support@enable.org with the dash in e-NABLE there. And this is all available on the website, enablingthefuture.org. You'll find all of that contact information. We actually make our 3D Universe 800 number, our phone number, available also as a phone-based support option for e-NABLE. So you can call us. We'll help direct you to the right place. There's a live chat function on the e-NABLE website, again, at enablingthefuture.org. There's a little, it's usually handled by an automated sort of a bot that will answer common questions, but it also gives you a way to reach out to us and get help beyond that. And by the way, when you're on enablingthefuture.org, if you go to the Learn More page in the top menu, that'll link you over to the hub that Jon has been talking about, so you don't have to remember multiple URLs.
Right. And there's also enablealliance.org, and they focus a lot on education. There's so many programs going on through Enable Alliance that it's just incredible what they're doing over there. They have been just phenomenal, just reaching out into the world in as many corners of the world as possible, and starting clinics in war-torn areas, getting devices and materials to the chapters in those areas, and trying to keep their recipients and their makers safe. So make sure you're also checking out enablealliance.org as well.
And as a matter of fact, if you go there really soon, you'll be notified about the 4th annual eNableCon.
Yes.
This time it's a mostly virtual event, but there will be presentations by most of the people on this panel and people from all over the world. And it's active over a couple of weeks, but there are a number of really good presentations by people from the FDA, from some people doing cutting edge bioprinting work in Europe. And if you want to know more about e-NABLE, this is actually a really good month to dig in, because there's plenty of opportunity to see presentations and to interact with the people involved.
It's true.
And your most direct route for that would be to go to enablealliance.org.
Yep. Although we've got it up on all of our websites now. So if you go to Enabling the Future, if you go to the Hub, if you go to Enable Alliance, any of those sites, you're going to see eNableCon and the links to register. So that's a great opportunity to learn a lot more and take a deeper dive. Well, we don't have too much time left, but before we wrap up here, I do want to circle back to what was mentioned earlier on about how the community has, we've mainly been making hands and arms for people, but recently with the COVID pandemic, we've seen the community pivot and also address that need. There's been a critical shortage in some areas of PPE, and so maybe we could talk a bit about how the community has gotten involved in helping with solutions for the pandemic and what you guys have seen around that. Jon?
Well, Jeremy in particular has been working with a group from University of Buffalo that I was connected with that has been developing a face mask. Like many other groups, we initially said, oh my God, we have to learn everything there is to know about respirators. That turned out to be a difficult problem and the wrong problem. Then many groups piled onto face shields, which were less challenging than face masks and very, very much needed. Jeremy was one of the first in the community to start churning out face masks. But, in Lithuania and Brazil, the e-NABLE chapters had significant impact on the entire country. They, I think on the order of 100,000 face shields were produced by chapter leaders there. In Lithuania, our chapter leader, Mazvis Sperdiolis, is basically responsible for all of the face shields in all of the hospitals in Lithuania. And now we're continuing to develop 3D printable and other forms of face masks, and people are still making personal protective equipment. Yeah. At the beginning, I pointed out that what was really interesting about e-NABLE, besides the fact that we do 3D printed prosthetics, was this global network of volunteers doing, if you will, off the books medical devices. That's actually worldwide become a very common pattern in the COVID era, because here also the medical industrial complex is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't cover all the cases all the time. And at this point, it's clear that there is a global network of volunteers who can jump in and fill the gaps. And personally, I'm hoping that that lesson will generalize back to all sorts of things, where the professional gatekeepers who keep the gates because they know the right way to do things when conditions allow, need to recognize that there are safety nets and escape valves available when conditions don't allow institutional solutions to solve everyone's problems. And
Yeah.
the COVID crisis, I think, has really made that clear.
I think just the maker community in general, just the way that, we see even before e-NABLE, but I think once e-NABLE was out there and people saw that, you can make another Yoda figurine and put it on Thingiverse and other people will make it. When e-NABLE first came out, people started realizing that they could make stuff that would help people and they would share it on Thingiverse or wherever. And with that spreading over the last 7 or 8 years, when the pandemic came out, within a week or days of it really hitting the United States, especially, we had e-NABLE DC, and we had the 3D printing Portland group. We had all these groups and chapters and maker spaces and schools and libraries, and they were just like, we have 3D printers, we're going to design a face shield, we're going to design ear savers. We've got people who are making ventilator splitters and sharing it as quickly as they could get it uploaded, and then within minutes or a day, somebody else has reworked it or refixed it and improved it, and then you've got all these different designs, and now 6-7 months later, we've got a variety of versions. But the maker community just went, we're stuck at home. We've got this technology. We know we can make stuff to help people. How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
That has been such an incredible thing to see.
And the sharing aspect of that is what I love so much. In years past, when there's a critical need that arises and there is no solution available for it, and some group or organization develops a solution to address that need, the thinking is always about, how do we monetize this? How do we turn this into something profitable? And with us, it's the opposite. It's how do we share this? How do we get this into the hands of others so they can benefit from it also, which is just so wonderful to see.
Right. It was really awesome to be able to say, when the pandemic hit the United States, it wasn't the US government that saved lives. It was the nerds and the geeks and the students and the makers. We all worked together to make thousands of pieces of PPE within weeks, and they were delivering them. I drove down to Portland, which was a 4-hour drive, to get, I think, 200 pieces of PPE and bring them back up to my hometown, which we only had like 3 or 4 makers busting them out, and we had a big outbreak out here. And it was just awesome to see, the donations pouring into these individuals, and like university groups like e-NABLE DC was able to raise like $10,000 in a week to be able to buy materials. And then we had businesses like 3D Universe, we started a button on our page where if we didn't want to have to wait for the sorry, the dog's excited. We didn't want to have to wait for the GoFundMe money. We wanted to get materials to people who needed it. So we started a button where you could donate to, or you could purchase a roll, and Jeremy would immediately send it out to whoever was in need as our makers so they could get it to the people who need it as quickly as possible.
I think e-NABLE in this, like, let's not kid ourselves. We didn't make all of this, but e-NABLE, like, we made some of it, obviously. But I think what it really did here is it set a precedent.
Yeah.
It said that maker, like, we can, if you want to get real specific, a precedent for pseudo-medical wearable devices, whether they let you pick stuff up or whether they clean the air you breathe.
Yeah.
But it kind of turned the maker community on to, hey, we can use this for more than figurines, more than cosplay. We can use this to help people.
Right.
And that it even set a precedent for this kind of distributive problem solving and nonprofit helping people.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
And for me, one of the exciting things is seeing how all these technologies are coming together to make this happen. We've got people all over the world now with 3D printers that are becoming more and more affordable. We have internet technologies such as some of the social media, and one of the ones that I've found most useful recently is Nextdoor, which is kind of social media for your local community. I put a post up on Nextdoor saying I've got free face shields for anybody that needs them. And I just, somebody says I could use a half a dozen of those, and I put them in a box out of my doorstep and they come by and pick them up, And it's been wonderful to be able to support the local community that way, especially with now teachers being called back to school. We want to make sure that they're protected, and to be able to feel like I'm helping those teachers in my local community and other medical professionals. It's been really rewarding. It's really exciting to see how that all comes together, the internet technologies and 3D printing and the goodwill, and all of it is just kind of unfolding in a very exciting and rewarding way.
Right. And it's not just PPE that they're helping with now. Our upcoming episode, we will be talking to Shashi and Connor from Makerforce, who have been making PPE in Portland with their group, but now we've got school is back in session. It's all online, and they've got some schools that they are working with in the Native American community who requested 3D printed brains because their students would, in the neuroscience labs, would normally get to dissect brains and learn about neuroscience, but they were able to rally their makers to switch from PPE for a week and 3D print these giant brains that these students will now, each student will get one, and they can pull it apart and check it out and hold it. And there's so many different ways that the e-NABLE community and just the maker community in general is helping, not just for PPE or medical devices, but teachers and students. And it's not just 3D printing either. There's folks who have designed laser cutter designs that will help, so you put something up on the top of your laptop, and it'll put a little mirror underneath it, and it projects the student's work up so the teacher can see it. There's so many different ways that the maker community can help each other, and it doesn't always have to be a life-saving or a life-changing endeavor. It can just be something that literally helps somebody get their homework done.
Yeah. We've actually got someone in the audience who's asking if we can see the hand, Peregrine. So for those on video, maybe do you have?
Yeah, I did. My wonderful partner over there went out and got the hands.
I love you.
And so this is the everyday hand. This is the hyper customized Osprey, which the files are available on Thingiverse.
Very cool.
The customization is this back bracer that's maybe almost twice as long as the original, and these claws are not standard. Actually, someone in the community was able to print. These are nylon fiberglass.
Oh, excellent.
I believe it's like onyx
Yep.
filament. Because my old claws broke a lot.
I hate when that happens.
But yeah, so this is my standard everyday hand.
Very nice.
And then this here is actually an old Osprey. You can see the difference in the bracer difference there.
Yep.
But this one has all the fingers except for the thumb ripped out, and a piece of pig wire
Nice.
straight into it,
Very creative.
where it would goes right in there, where
Great.
the cable would normally.
That's
so
terrific.
cool.
Very cool. All right, well, we are going to have to wrap up. There's so much more we could talk about here, I know, but we only have so much time. So I want to reiterate Jon's invitation to anyone who wants to help support this community. Donations are always helpful. You know, our volunteers cover these costs of making these devices and hands by themselves, but having funding from other organizations is a tremendous help to fund projects and ongoing development. So if you visit enablingthefuture.org, there is a button there you can click to partner with e-NABLE and learn about how you can help to support us or partner with the community and help keep this work going. So I want to invite folks to go check that out and consider joining us in one form or another.
Yeah, and come join us at eNableCon.
Definitely, yes. So check out, again, enablealliance.org. You can get information about how to register for EnableCon. It's also on our other websites, and I hope we'll see some of you there. I want to give a big thanks to all of our speakers tonight. Jen, Jon, Peregrine, thanks so much for joining for this. It's been a great talk, and I look forward to our next discussion. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining, and stay tuned on our webpage at shop3duniverse.com. We have a page there for 3D Universe Untethered where you can see all of our upcoming episodes and recordings from past episodes. So check that out.
And thank you, Jeremy, for all you do.
Of course.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure as always. All right, everyone. Thanks for joining. See you next time.
Good to see you all. Bye.